Okay, so when we left off, I was just making individual layers of each of my storyboard frames. And we're going to use these to show you the animation tools. Just to show this, because this is tricky, I'm using the gray square on this layer as a stencil. I'm using the magic wand to get that selection, that exact same shape each time, because animations need to exist within the same frame. Then, and there are other ways to do this, but this is just one way of getting you to think about it. Then I'm going to click on the marquee tool so I can move that selection down to the next frame I want to copy. I need to use the marquee tool rather than the move tool, because the move tool would move the pixels within that selection, not the selection itself. And I need to use the marquee tool, not the lasso tool, because if I use the lasso tool, it will start a new selection, right, when I click. So the marquee tool is a great way to move selections, even if it's a really complicated selection that's not a square or a circle. Now I have the area selected I want, but I need to go down to my background layer before I hit Command J to duplicate it. Then I go back up, get my stencil for the selection, go back to my background layer, use the marquee tool to move it, and then duplicate it. And it feels incredibly repetitive, and you have to kind of keep a presence of mind not to miss a step, like choosing the layer, and this is getting you ready for what animating is like. And you have to kind of keep track of where you are and what you've done. And so far, I have created 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 frames, right? And they're all in sequence here. So if I turn these eyeballs off, it gets back to frame 1, and it reveals it. So I just need these last 3 frames, and you're going to get really sick of me saying the exact same things over and over again, because that's how animation is. So I go to my template, I hit magic wand to select it, I then click on the marquee tool, I click on the background layer, I move that selection with the marquee tool to the frame I want to copy, I hit Command J from the background. Go back to my gray, select it, go to the marquee tool, go to the background layer, which is getting further and further away as I build these new layers, and then duplicate from it. And then last one, go to the gray, use the magic wand, select it, go to the marquee tool to move the selection, go down to the background layer, move the selection over the frame I want to copy, and then Command J. And I'm left with this. Now I'm going to leave that gray layer so you can see what an unwanted layer does in animation. And I am going to use it. And now I'm going to use the move tool, and I'm going to move this gray layer up to the corner. You see those little purple lines? They're going to lock in place. Then I'm going to go through each layer, and I can start with the furthest one away, layer 11. It's like stacking cards. And I guess before I do this, I can move my gray layer down to the bottom of the stack, right on top of my background. So this is like I'm learning to be a professional card dealer in Vegas. And the task is, I have my target area where I need to place the card exactly. Otherwise, the patrons will be suspicious, right? And I have to learn how to put these cards exactly on top of each other. So I go to the bottom of my stack, and I'm going to put that there on the bottom. And it's going to lock right in place. If it's not locking, let me know. That's going to be under your default settings. It's under View, and you want things to snap. You want things to snap to your guides, to your layers, to your document bounds. That means the edges of your pixels. That snap is incredibly important. Okay, then I go to layer 10, and I'm just using the move tool, and I'm just stacking them right on top of each other. Putting all these assets together. And it's making you aware of the sequence and the order of each of your layers. Because if they get out of order, your animation's not going to make any sense. And the animation of a rough storyboard, this is called an animatic. Sometimes animatics are incredibly rough like this, but sometimes they can include like 3D models, kind of advanced camera moves. There are ways of testing out things before you actually go into full production on them. Okay, now I'm going to use that same move tool. I'll show you what I just did. And we're going to create our own guides. So guidelines can be very helpful in animation. I click on the ruler and I drag out from it, click and drag, and it will lock at the edges of the pixels. As long as I don't have my background layer showing, right? Same thing. Turn off my background layer, click on the horizontal guide, and it will lock. Now I'm going to go to the crop tool. And maybe before I do this, I say File, Save As, not save, but save as, and I'm going to resave this as a different name because it's no longer a storyboard. Now this is called an animatic. And this is not something you're required to post. This is just test. So this is my assignment 3 animation animatic. It's not even an animation, it's just an animatic. Okay, it's a very quick and sketchy animation. Okay, now I can crop it. Why did I save before I cropped it? Because now I'm going to lose a lot of pixels from my original storyboard. And I just move that crop window and it will snap to the guides and then hit return. So now I'm thinking in flipbook form, right? Instead of in a comic book page storyboard form. And notice that the order of the flipbook, if I turn the eyeballs on and off, it's in the order of my story. So I can flip those pages as quickly as I can turn off this eyeball. Make sense? It sounds really cool to have animation tools in Photoshop, but all animation tools in Photoshop is a way to program this eyeball turning on and off and put it on a timer. That's all it is. So I have a flipbook here. I have a stack of images. They're in the right order. How do I time it so I don't have to physically click on that eyeball? I go to Window, and I use the tool called Timeline. That will open up the Timeline window. It will always show up at the bottom of your frame, and you're going to click on Create Frame Animation. What we're doing is called frame by frame animation. It's different than video editing. If you've used iMovie, if you've edited movie clips, that's all what's called timeline animation, where you're using the overall timing of it and you're telling when things start and stop and how long it takes for them to do something. But when we're building from scratch, you do frame by frame animation and you have the most control of each minute change. And it's just the most basic form. So once you've done frame by frame animation, it will look like this. Go to the timeline window options, which are the little 3 bars in the corner. And you're going to say, make frames from layers. So a frame is what your viewer is seeing. Your frame is a flipbook page. Your layer is just like any Photoshop layer. So your frame can contain multiple layers if you want it to. In the animatic, each frame is just going to contain one layer. So if you say make frames from layers, it doesn't change anything in your layers. But what it does is it outputs this little kind of film strip in your timeline that plays through each layer you have. And it starts with sometimes layers you don't want, like my storyboard layer, and then the gray layer. So if you don't want those, you can drag those down to the trash. This is important. You never hit delete. If you hit delete, instead of dragging it to the trash, when you're on the frame, what it does, well, if it wasn't locked, what it would do is delete that layer. And that's not what I want to do. But because my background's locked, it didn't do that. All right, so what do? You drag it to the trash until you get to your first frame. But that doesn't look like my first frame. And that's because the order of your layers dictates the sequence of your frames. And because we built it so that our first layer was at the top, because that makes sense to us vertically, right? Like page 1 of the flipbook is at the top, page 2 is next, page 3 is next. But the computer thinks from the bottom up. So it thinks layer 1 should be here. There's a simple solution for this. We can simply select all of the frames by holding down Shift and clicking at the beginning and clicking at the end till they're all highlighted. Then going to our frame window, and we simply say reverse frames. And so then it will play them in reverse order. Okay, now you'll notice that each frame has a time signature underneath it. Right now it's 0 seconds. So if I hit play, it goes as fast as the computer can process it. It really shouldn't do anything because 0 is 0, but the computer knows better than that. So that's too fast. I can't tell what's going on. So we have to program the timing. I like to use a standard default timing for my animation tests, and that's 0.3 seconds. So to set that, select all of your frames. Notice that no matter what we do here, except hitting delete, doesn't change our layers, right? So even though I got rid of the frames that contained these layers, those layers are still safe. I can still use them later. Okay, now I'm going to right-click on the time signature, and I can choose one of the givens, or I can say other, which I like to do, and put in period 3, 0.3 seconds for each. And because I had them all selected, now they'll all be 0.3 seconds. Underneath that, you'll have the option of playing it through once, playing it through 3 times and then stopping, or playing it through forever. I would just always have it set at forever. So it keeps looping so you can see what your issues are. And now you play your animatic. And it animates through. And if your storyboard makes sense, then you should be able to tell it. But you can also pause it. This is the one where my storyboard doesn't make sense. Because it looks a whole lot like this one. So I got a frame out of place somehow. Layer 5 and layer 3. So this is where you can kind of go through and look at each one. And notice when I click on a frame, look at your layers. So when I click on frame 1, my top layer is the only thing with the eyeball. When I click on frame 2, it's the next one. Frame 3, frame 4, all that's making sense. Frame 5, frame 6, frame 7. What happens at frame 7? Look how all the eyeballs are turned on. So that's where the mistake happened, right? So remember, all you're doing with the timeline is you're programming the eyeballs. So if I'm selecting frame 7, then I can turn off the eyeballs I don't need. And all of a sudden, I now have the right one. And so this is the most basic way of doing a timeline animation. One frame shows one layer. But you can also have each frame show multiple layers, right? Okay, so that's my rough animatic. Does it tell the story I want? Yes. Is it too fast in some areas, right? Where just everything kind of goes by too quickly? Yes, because these are just the main moments. What if I wanted to extend a moment? What if I wanted to extend this time when it emerges and then shakes and then walks off? Well, what I can do without having to create any extra layers is I can duplicate this frame, which gives me another 0.3 seconds, right? Or I can change its time to be 0.6 seconds. And then that plays through that one a little bit longer. And that looks like this. So we see that a little bit longer. Or I can take that, I can duplicate it again with the little plus sign in the timeline window, and then I can move that frame after the shake. Then I can duplicate it again.